education against anybody's education. So the fact of being of poverty, the fact of being all one race had nothing to do with it. We had, just as we're going to talk about in this segment, we had what we had then, great teachers, great instructional leaders who gave unconditional love to every child and each child, only because they were the child, they were the adult, they were the student, they were there to teach, they were there to, I was there to learn and they were there to teach. The rest took care of itself. But the last ingredient before I turn to Dr. Washington is that they wanted to be there. They had the will and the want to be in that environment, to be with the student body population, to be with the neighborhood and the community in which they were there to serve. And all that plays into factor today. Jump forward, August 28th coming up, the 5th anniversary of the March on Washington. We just celebrated the letters from the Birmingham jail, 50th anniversary on August 19th. And so we're in this kind of re-looking at everything again. That's why it's so great to have Dr. Washington here to look at kind of where we've come, where we are now, but more importantly, where we as a community, as a people need to go for the sake of all our children. Yes, I said all our children. And those are all our children. They're our future workforce, our future everything. They have to be educated, they must be educated. How are we going to do that today is the question. Welcome, Dr. Washington.
Thank you.
I hope I set it up. I was trying to give a context for our dialogue because I think all that I tried to indicate in the beginning is so true. We are at this very critical step in peace, are we not?
We are at a very critical place. Education is shifting. The world has shifted drastically. Education is shifting, but is not shifting along with the world. There's a lot of turmoil that's going on in the educational system, but we're not keeping up with the changes of the world.
A few weeks ago, probably a few months ago now, I had a Hispanic educator sitting in the same seat you are, a Hispanic young lady who's also working in education. The parallels of what's happening or not happening with African American children and Hispanic children are pretty much the same. And some of the issues are the same. Kind of elaborate for us, what are some of those that you see almost everywhere you go?
Well, what we see among children of color is that they are coming to school not ready for school.
Okay.
So when they arrive at school at 3 or 4 years old, or 4 or 5 years old, they are already 3 or 4 or 5 years behind the process.
Wow.
And so, and that's significant when you're talking about a learning process, to be that many years behind the process. So the kids who have come to school already ready to school are kids whose parents have read to them from the time they brought them home from the hospital. And for some of them, even before that. Some of them, their mothers were reading to them when they were in the womb. When they came home from the hospital, they came home to characters in mobiles. In their mobiles, they had characters from books. They had books all around the room. They played games with these characters. And they read to them bedtime stories. And so that is a critical point at how you teach children to do school, because school is set up the way that
reading is so important.
It's so important, but it also helps them understand how school is done, how school learning is done. So when you read to a child, they've learned to listen. Eventually they learn to, on cue, respond and give something back to you. They learn to critically think, because mom is asking baby or dad is asking baby, what color is that ball? What shape is that ball? And those are like what I call what questions. And then they say, which goes to the reason questions, why do you think the ball is shaped round? Is it so that it can roll? So they're learning these things. When, you know, at infancy, they're learning these things. When they show up at school at 3 years old, they're right on time.
So the critical thinking skills that need to be started even in early childhood education, which many kids don't have access to and are not avail themselves of it, really isn't so important to make that difference even when you start off. You start off behind. Your first day of school as a first grader, you're behind.
Right, so the gap that we see between white American kids and kids of color actually happens by the time kids are 2 years old.
Wow, and the gap then just gets, and now all those numbers and statistics are there by if you're about a third grade, if you're already behind in reading, that's a predictor you're gonna probably drop out of school?
Yes, well, that's what the prison industry
prison
is
to pipeline.
That's what the prison industry is
School
using.
to prison pipeline.
Yeah, because you know, and you can't blame them because they're in the business to make money.
Yeah, and they're building them. They're building them empty, knowing that the product is coming.
Well, they only know that because they have looked back in history to see that if they failed third grade, those third grade reading exams, they usually didn't get out of high school.
Right, and drop out in high school.
Yeah.
So I know I have a ready set of people coming down the pipeline.
Yeah,
that's sad.
But here's the other thing that's sad about school is that because our economy, the way that we move through life today, not just our economy, but everything we do, everything is so global, and it's centered on the internet, technology, advancements, those kind of things. School is not keeping up with that. And so the other sad thing about that is that we have people who are dropping out of school because they're bored.
Yes, and you hear that so often.
And you just heard the creator of Tumblr who sold that for $1 billion, a high school dropout that created that. And he's not, there are others,
And his thing was just a way of keeping people engaged.
Engaged, exactly. And then you had Steve Jobs, and you have Bill Gates, and you have Zuckerberg, and you have Oprah Winfrey, these people who dropped out of college because it wasn't working for them, but went on to transform the world. So that means that we've got to transform.
So what do we do in the urban setting? I mean, what do we do in urban public schools right now? As I said, just down the street from here, we have examples of it's almost like we're warehousing kids again. That's not much learning going on in those buildings.
Well, the first thing we have to do, I believe, is we really have to focus on helping our teachers become better at what they do.
Okay.
We don't support them enough. We don't